I was standing in my driveway washing my truck on a Saturday morning in May when I heard the clicking of heels on pavement behind me. Before I could even turn around, a shrill voice cut through the peaceful suburban air like nails on a chalkboard. "That tree is going to have to come down immediately." I turned to see Karen Fitzgerald, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association in Charlotte, North Carolina, pointing at the massive oak tree that stood at the property line between my yard and the common area. She was wearing her standard uniform, a pressed white blouse, khaki capris, and an expression that suggested she had just discovered someone had parked half an inch over the designated lines in the visitor lot. "Excuse me," I said, setting down my hose. "The tree, Daniel. It is leaning toward the association property, and several branches overhang the walking path. It is a liability, and according to HOA bylaws section 12.4, any vegetation that poses a risk to common areas must be removed at the homeowner's expense." I looked up at the oak. It was beautiful, maybe 80 years old, with thick branches that provided shade over half my backyard, and yes, a portion of the walking path that ran along the edge of the neighborhood common area. The tree had been there when I bought the house 3 years ago. It had been there when this subdivision was built 20 years ago. Hell, it had been there long before any of us showed up. "Karen, that tree is perfectly healthy. It is not leaning anywhere except the way it has been growing for decades." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph she had clearly taken earlier that morning. "The angle clearly shows a pronounced lean. I have already consulted with the HOA board, and we are unanimous in our decision. You have 30 days to have it removed, or we will be forced to take action." "What kind of action?" "Fines of $100 per day until compliance, and if necessary, we will have it removed and place a lien on your property for the costs." I felt my jaw tighten. "You cannot just demand I cut down a healthy tree. Read your bylaws, Daniel. Section 12.4. I will be sending you a formal notice in writing by Monday." She turned on her heel and walked away, her phone already pressed to her ear, probably calling another homeowner to harass about their mailbox color or lawn height. I stood there for a moment, water from the forgotten hose running across the driveway. This was not the first run-in I had with Karen Fitzgerald. 6 months ago, she had sent me a violation notice because my garbage cans were visible from the street on a Tuesday, despite the fact that Tuesday was trash day and everyone had their cans out. Before that, it was a complaint about my front door wreath being too large according to the aesthetic standards outlined in the HOA guidelines. Each time, I had pushed back, and each time, she had eventually backed down when I pointed out that her interpretations of the rules were either incorrect or unreasonably applied. But this felt different. This felt personal. I called my neighbor, Tom, who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates since it was built. He answered on the third ring. "Tom, did Karen say anything to you about trees?" "Oh man, you two. She came by last month demanding I trim my crepe myrtles because they were blocking the sight line from the street. I told her they were nowhere near the street, and she threatened to fine me. I trimmed them anyway because I did not want the hassle. She wants me to cut down my oak tree." There was a long pause. "The big one in your backyard. Daniel, that tree is a landmark. Everyone in the neighborhood knows that tree. She says it is leaning and poses a liability. That is insane. Listen, Karen has been on a power trip ever since she became HOA president 2 years ago. The woman has nothing better to do than drive around looking for violations. My advice, get everything in writing and do not give her an inch. She backs down when people actually fight back with documentation." I thanked Tom and hung up. Then I walked out to the tree and really looked at it. The trunk was straight and solid. The The branches were full of fresh spring leaves. There was no rot, no disease, no signs of instability. If anything, it was one of the healthiest trees in the neighborhood. On Monday morning, true to her word, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The HOA letterhead was embossed at the top, and Karen's signature was at the bottom. The letter cited Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws and demanded the removal of the oak tree located at 2847 Windermere Drive within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in daily fines beginning on day 31. I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws that night and read Section 12.4. It stated, "Any vegetation, structure, or improvement that poses an imminent safety hazard to common areas, adjacent properties, or residents must be remedied within a reasonable timeframe as determined by the HOA board. The responsible homeowner shall bear all costs associated with remediation." The key word was imminent. There was nothing imminent about a healthy tree that had been standing in the same spot for 8 decades. I decided to get professional documentation. On Tuesday, I called Jenkins Arborist Services, a well-respected company in the Charlotte area. They sent out a certified arborist named Robert Hayes on Thursday afternoon. Robert was in his late 50s with weathered hands and the calm demeanor of someone who had spent his life around trees. He walked around the oak for 10 minutes, examining the trunk, the root system, and the branches with various tools and instruments. He took photographs from multiple angles and even climbed up into the canopy to check the major limbs. When he came down, he was shaking his head. "Whoever told you this tree is dangerous does not know what they are talking about. This is a Quercus virginiana, a southern live oak, probably planted in the 1940s. The root system is extensive and stable, the trunk shows no signs of disease or decay, and the branch structure is sound. Yes, it has a slight natural lean to the east, but that is normal growth pattern for this species, especially given the afternoon sun exposure. This tree could easily stand for another 100 years. Can you put that in writing?" "Absolutely. I will send you a full report with photographs and my professional assessment. For the record, removing this tree would be a crime against nature. These old oaks are getting rare in developed areas." The report arrived by email on Friday. It was thorough, professional, and unambiguous. The tree posed no safety risk and required no immediate intervention beyond routine maintenance pruning, which Robert noted had been properly done within the last 2 years. I sent a copy of the report to Karen Fitzgerald via certified mail, along with a letter stating that I would not be removing the tree and that any further action by the HOA would be contested. Her response came faster than I expected. On Monday of the following week, I received another certified letter. This one was not from the HOA but from a law firm, Whitmore and Associates, attorneys at law. The letter informed me that the Meadowbrook Estates HOA was filing a lawsuit against me in Mecklenburg County Civil Court for failure to comply with HOA bylaws and regulations. The suit sought an injunction forcing me to remove the tree, compensation for ongoing liability exposure, and attorney fees. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter. They were actually suing me over a tree. I called my buddy Marcus, who was a lawyer, though not the kind who handled HOA disputes. He worked in criminal defense. "Marcus, I need a referral. I am being sued by my HOA. Seriously. What did you do? Paint your house neon pink? They want me to cut down my oak tree." "The big one in your backyard. I remember that tree from your barbecue last summer. That is a beautiful tree." "Yeah, well, Karen Fitzgerald says it is a safety hazard. I got an arborist report saying otherwise, and now they are suing me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Okay, you need someone who specializes in property law and HOA disputes. Let me make some calls. In the meantime, do not communicate with them directly. Everything goes through lawyers now." He called me back 2 hours later with a name: Patricia Dalton, a real estate attorney who had handled several high-profile HOA cases in the Charlotte area. I called her office immediately and set up a consultation for Wednesday. Patricia Dalton was in her early 40s, sharply dressed, and had the kind of direct manner that put me at ease immediately. I explained the situation, showed her the HOA letters, the arborist report, and the lawsuit filing. She read through everything carefully, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me. "This is going to sound strange, but this is actually a pretty straightforward case. The HOA has no legal standing. Your arborist report clearly demonstrates that the tree poses no imminent safety hazard, which is the threshold required by their own bylaws. They are overreaching. So what do? We file a response denying their claims and present the arborist report as evidence. I will also recommend that we countersue for legal fees and costs because this is a frivolous lawsuit. HOAs have broad powers, but they are not unlimited. When they abuse those powers, they can be held accountable. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $3,000. If we win, and I am confident we will, you can recover your legal costs from the HOA. That means Karen Fitzgerald and her board will be paying your legal bills out of the HOA funds, which are funded by all the homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates. That tends to make boards think twice about these kinds of actions. I wrote the check. I did not have much choice. Over the next month, the legal proceedings moved forward. Patricia filed our response and counterclaim. The HOA, through their attorney, continued to insist that the tree posed a risk and that my arborist was biased because I had paid for the report. They submitted their own expert opinion from someone named Gary Richardson, who claimed to be a tree specialist. Patricia looked into Richardson's credentials. He had no certification from the International Society of Arboriculture, no degree in forestry or horticulture, and his business license listed him as a landscaping contractor. His entire report consisted of 3 paragraphs and 2 blurry photographs that appeared to have been taken from Karen's phone. This is not even close to a credible expert opinion, Patricia told me during one of our phone calls. Richardson is not qualified to assess tree health or safety. Your arborist, Robert Hayes, has 30 years of experience and multiple certifications. This is going to come down to expert testimony, and we have the real expert. The court date was set for August 15th. As summer wore on, I noticed Karen driving by my house more frequently. Twice, I caught her taking photographs of the tree from the street. Once, I saw her walking on the common area path with a tape measure, apparently documenting how far the branches extended over the walkway. The stress was getting to me. I had nightmares about coming home to find the tree cut down. I installed a security camera pointed at my backyard just to have evidence if anyone trespassed. My girlfriend, Sarah, kept telling me to let it go and just cut the tree down to end the drama. It is not about the tree anymore, I told her. It is about the principle. Karen cannot just bully people into doing whatever she wants because she has a little bit of power. Is the principle worth thousands of dollars in legal fees? If I win, she pays the fees. And if I do not fight this, what is next? She decides my house color is wrong. My car is too old. Where does it end? Sarah did not have an answer for that. The week before the court date, Patricia called me with news. The HOA's attorney reached out. They want to settle. They are willing to drop the lawsuit if you agree to some light pruning of the branches over the walking path. What did you tell them? I told them we would consider it if they paid all your legal fees and arborist costs to date, and if they agreed in writing that the tree poses no safety hazard and requires no removal. And they rejected it. They are willing to drop the lawsuit but not willing to pay your costs or admit they were wrong. My recommendation is we go to trial. We have the stronger case, and the judge needs to see that the HOA cannot abuse its authority like this. Let us go to trial. On August 15th, I put on the only suit I owned and drove to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse in downtown Charlotte. Patricia met me outside. Robert Hayes, the arborist, was there as well, dressed in a sport coat and carrying a folder full of documents and photographs. Inside the courtroom, I saw Karen Fitzgerald sitting with the HOA's attorney, a young guy in his 30s named Brad Stevenson. Karen looked confident, almost smug. Sitting behind them were two other HOA board members I recognized from neighborhood meetings. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Martha Reynolds. She had a reputation, Patricia had told me, for being no-nonsense and not tolerating games from either side. The proceedings began with Stevenson presenting the HOA's case. He argued that the tree posed a liability risk to the association, that branches overhung the common area walking path, and that I had refused to comply with reasonable requests for removal, despite repeated notices. He called Karen Fitzgerald to the stand first. Karen took the oath and sat down, adjusting her blazer. Stevenson walked her through the timeline of notices and my refusals. Karen spoke clearly and confidently, painting a picture of a stubborn homeowner who refused to follow community rules. Miss Fitzgerald, in your professional opinion as HOA president, does this tree pose a risk to the community? Stevenson asked. Absolutely. The tree leans significantly toward the common area, and several residents have expressed concerns about large branches falling. We have a responsibility to protect the community. When it was Patricia's turn to cross-examine, she stood up with a calm smile. Miss Fitzgerald, what is your professional background in arboriculture or forestry? I do not have a background in that field. Do you have any certification or training in assessing tree health or safety? No, but it is obvious when a tree is dangerous. Obvious to whom? Do you have any scientific basis for your claim that this tree is dangerous? Karen hesitated. We hired an expert. You are referring to Gary Richardson? Yes. And what are Mr. Richardson's qualifications? He is a tree specialist. He is a landscaping contractor with no certification in arboriculture. Correct, Stevenson objected, but Judge Reynolds overruled it. Answer the question, Miss Fitzgerald. I do not know his specific certifications. Did you verify his credentials before accepting his opinion? We trusted his expertise. Patricia let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Miss Fitzgerald, is it fair to say that you have had multiple disputes with my client over HOA matters in the past? He has been cited for violations, yes. And in each case, he successfully challenged those citations, correct? We reached resolutions. Resolutions where the HOA backed down, correct? Karen's face was starting to flush. I would not characterize it that way. How would you characterize it? We enforce our rules fairly. Patricia nodded slowly. One more question, Miss Fitzgerald. How many other homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates have trees with branches that overhang common areas or adjacent properties? I do not have that information. Would you estimate more than 10, possibly? More than 20? I would have to check. But my client is the only one you have sued for tree removal, correct? Karen did not answer immediately. Judge Reynolds prompted her. Miss Fitzgerald, Yes, he is the only one. Patricia sat down. No further questions. Stevenson then called Gary Richardson to the stand. Richardson was in his 50s, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked like it had been ironed that morning for the first time in years. He testified that he had looked at the tree and determined it was leaning dangerously. Patricia's cross-examination was brief and devastating. Mr. Richardson, are you a certified arborist? I have been working with trees for 25 years. That was not my question. Are you certified by the International Society of Arboriculture? No. Do you have a degree in forestry, horticulture, or any related field? No, madam. How did you assess the tree's stability? I looked at it. Did you use any instruments? Resistograph, sonic tomography, root collar excavation. I did not need instruments. I could see it was leaning. Did you examine the root system? No. Did you check for decay or disease? It looked healthy, but that does not mean it is not leaning. Mr. Richardson, are you aware that many tree species have a natural growth lean based on sun exposure and environmental factors? Sure, but this one looked excessive. Based on what standard? Richardson shifted uncomfortably. Based on my experience. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. No further questions. Then it was our turn. Patricia called Robert Hayes to the stand. Robert took the oath and sat down with the calm authority of someone who knew his subject inside and out. Patricia walked him through his credentials. 32 years as a certified arborist, degrees in forestry and horticulture, member of the International Society of Arboriculture, expert witness in over 40 cases involving tree health and safety. Then she had him explain his assessment of my oak tree. The tree in question is a southern live oak, Quercus virginiana, approximately 80 to 90 years old based on trunk diameter and growth rings. I conducted a comprehensive assessment including visual inspection, resistograph testing for internal decay, root collar examination, and branch structure analysis. The tree is in excellent health with no signs of disease, pest infestation, or structural instability. What about the lean that Miss Fitzgerald mentioned? The tree has a natural growth lean of approximately 8 degrees to the east, which is well within normal parameters for this species. The lean is caused by the tree's response to afternoon sunlight and is not indicative of root failure or instability. The root system is extensive and sound. I would classify this tree as low risk using the ISA's tree risk assessment protocol. In your professional opinion, does this tree need to be removed? Absolutely not. This tree poses no more risk than any other mature tree in the neighborhood. In fact, it is one of the healthiest specimens I have seen in an urban environment. Removing it would be unnecessary and, frankly, a waste of a beautiful and historically significant tree. Stevenson cross-examined Robert, but he had little to work with. He tried to suggest that Robert was biased because I had paid for the assessment. Is it not true that Mr. Irving paid you for your report? Yes, as is standard practice. I am a professional arborist. I charge for my services. So you had a financial incentive to tell him what he wanted to hear. Robert's expression hardened slightly. Counselor, my reputation has been built over 3 decades of honest, accurate assessments. If I told clients what they wanted to hear instead of the truth, I would not be in business. My report reflects my professional opinion based on scientific assessment methods. If you have evidence that my methodology is flawed or my conclusions are incorrect, I would be happy to address that. Stevenson had no such evidence. He dismissed the witness. Patricia then called me to the stand. I testified about the timeline of events, the letters from Karen, my attempts to resolve the situation, and the costs I had incurred for the arborist report and legal fees. Patricia entered into evidence copies of all the correspondence, the Arborist report, and an itemized list of my expenses to date. $3,000 for Patricia's retainer, another $1,500 in additional legal fees as the case progressed, $1,200 for Robert's comprehensive assessment and report preparation, and various filing fees and administrative costs. The total was just over $6,000. When both sides had rested, Judge Reynolds took a 15-minute recess to review the evidence. When she returned, she looked directly at Karen Fitzgerald and the HOA's attorney. "I have reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today. It is clear to me that the HOA has failed to demonstrate that the tree in question poses any imminent safety hazard, as required by their own bylaws. The testimony of Mr. Hayes, a qualified and certified arborist, is credible and supported by scientific methodology. In contrast, the HOA's expert, Mr. Richardson, lacks the qualifications and methodology to provide a credible opinion on tree health and safety." Judge Reynolds flipped through some papers before continuing. "Furthermore, the evidence suggests that the HOA has selectively enforced this particular bylaw against Mr. Irving while ignoring similar situations throughout the neighborhood. This selective enforcement, combined with the lack of scientific basis for the HOA's claims, indicates an abuse of authority." Karen's face had gone from confident to pale. "The HOA's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Irving is under no obligation to remove the tree. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Irving's counterclaim for legal fees and costs. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA is ordered to pay Mr. Irving the full amount of his documented legal expenses, totaling $6,175, within 30 days. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, Patricia shook my hand. "Congratulations, that went exactly as I expected. The judge saw right through their nonsense. What happens now? The HOA has to pay you within 30 days. If they do not, we can pursue collection through the court. I will send them a formal demand letter with the judgment attached. Believe me, they will pay. They do not want additional legal exposure." Robert Hayes clapped me on the shoulder. "Glad it worked out. That is a special tree you have got there. Take care of it." "I will. And thank you for everything. Your testimony made all the difference. Just doing my job, though I have got to say it is always satisfying to see common sense win in court." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The anxiety that had been sitting in my chest since May was finally gone. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment just looking at the oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the August breeze. It really was a beautiful tree. That evening, Tom called me. "I heard you won in court." Word travels fast in this neighborhood. "Yeah, the judge dismissed their case and made them pay all my costs." "Good for you, man. Karen needed to be put in her place. Maybe this will make her think twice before harassing other homeowners." "I hope so." Over the next week, I started getting calls and messages from other residents in Meadowbrook Estates. Some congratulated me. Others shared their own stories of Karen's overreach. Fines for garden gnomes, threats over porch furniture, demands to repaint front doors that were the wrong shade of approved colors. The more people talked, the more it became clear that Karen had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and people were tired of it. 3 weeks after the court date, I received a check from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA for $6,175, along with a terse letter from Brad Stevenson confirming payment of the judgment. I deposited the check immediately. 2 weeks after that, I got a knock on my door on a Saturday afternoon. It was Tom and another neighbor, Linda Martinez. Linda was in her 50s and had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. "Daniel, do you have a few minutes?" Linda asked. "Sure, come in." We sat in my living room, and Linda got straight to the point. "We are organizing a recall petition for the HOA board. After what happened with your case, a lot of residents are fed up with Karen's leadership. We need signatures from 40% of homeowners to trigger a recall election. We already have about 30%. Would you be willing to sign and maybe help us get more signatures?" "Absolutely. We are also hoping you might be willing to run for the board. We need people who will actually stand up to this kind of abuse." I had not considered that. "I do not know if I am qualified. You are a homeowner, and you have more experience dealing with HOA legal issues than most of us. That is more qualified than Karen." Tom chimed in. "Think about it, man. You do not have to decide now, but we could use someone like you." Over the next month, the recall petition gained momentum. People were coming out of the woodwork with stories about Karen's behavior. The petition reached the required 40% within 3 weeks, triggering a special election for all 5 board positions. I did decide to run, along with Tom, Linda, and several other reasonable people from the neighborhood. Karen and 2 of her allies also ran to keep their positions. The election was held in mid-October at the community clubhouse. The turnout was massive, far higher than any previous HOA election. When the votes were counted, Karen and her 2 allies had lost. The new board consisted of Linda as president, Tom as vice president, me as secretary, and 2 other level-headed homeowners as members at large. At our first board meeting, we reviewed the HOA's finances and policies. What we found was disturbing. Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, disguised as community management costs. There were charges for meals, gas, and even a weekend trip to Asheville that was supposedly for a regional HOA conference that no one could verify existed. In total, she had misappropriated about $8,000 over 2 years. Linda called an emergency meeting with the HOA's attorney, a different one than Brad Stevenson. The attorney reviewed the documentation and was clear. This is misappropriation of funds. You have grounds for civil action, and depending on how the district attorney views it, it could be criminal. The board voted unanimously to report the matter to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. A detective named Morrison took the case. He interviewed board members, reviewed financial records, and eventually brought charges against Karen Fitzgerald for embezzlement and fraud. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. Karen hired a defense attorney and initially tried to claim the expenses were legitimate, but the evidence was too clear. Text messages and emails showed her discussing personal trips and meals, not HOA business. Receipts showed charges at restaurants and stores nowhere near any HOA-related activities. In January of the following year, Karen accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzlement under $10,000, a misdemeanor in North Carolina. She was sentenced to 6 months of supervised probation, ordered to pay restitution of $8,000 to the HOA, and given 100 hours of community service. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Mecklenburg County. The whole saga had taken 9 months from the day Karen first told me to cut down my tree to the day she stood in court and pleaded guilty to stealing from the community she claimed to serve. That spring, I was sitting in my backyard under the oak tree with Sarah. We had made it through the drama and our relationship was stronger for it. She had stuck by me even when she thought I was crazy for fighting the HOA. "You were right," she said, looking up at the canopy of leaves above us. "It was worth fighting for. The tree, the principle. If you had backed down, Karen would still be terrorizing the neighborhood, and she would still be stealing from the HOA. You standing up to her started a chain reaction. I just did not want to cut down my tree, she laughed. Well, your stubbornness saved a tree and exposed a criminal. Not a bad outcome. The new HOA board had been functioning smoothly. We simplified the bylaws, removed ridiculous restrictions on things like door wreath sizes and garden gnome bans, and focused on actual community improvements like repairing the playground equipment and organizing neighborhood events. Complaints and violations dropped dramatically because people were no longer living in fear of arbitrary enforcement. Tom had been right that first day on the phone. Karen backed down when people fought back with documentation. The problem was, most people did not have the resources or will to fight. They just complied, even when the demands were unreasonable. I had been lucky to have the means to hire an attorney and an arborist. Not everyone could afford that. At one of our board meetings in March, I proposed creating an HOA assistance fund for homeowners who faced unreasonable enforcement actions. The fund would provide loans or grants for legal consultation and expert opinions when residents believed they were being targeted unfairly. How would we fund it? Linda asked. We have the $8,000 in restitution from Karen. That is a start. We could also add a small line item to the annual budget, maybe $5 per household. With 200 homes in Meadowbrook Estates, that is another $1,000 a year. And the fund would be self-replenishing if people pay back loans after winning their cases. The board approved it unanimously. We called it the Homeowner Protection Fund, and we appointed an independent committee to review applications and determine eligibility. The goal was to prevent future Karens from abusing their authority because homeowners would have resources to fight back. In April, I got a call from Patricia Dalton. Daniel, I wanted to let you know that I have been getting calls from residents in other HOA communities around Charlotte. Word has spread about your case and the reforms your board implemented. People want to know how to do the same thing in their neighborhoods. That is great. I am putting together a seminar for homeowners on HOA rights and how to challenge overreach. Would you be willing to speak about your experience? Sure, I can do that. The seminar was held at a library in South Charlotte on a Saturday morning in May, almost exactly 1 year after Karen had first demanded I cut down my tree. About 70 people showed up. Patricia gave a presentation on HOA law in North Carolina, homeowner rights, and the legal process for challenging HOA actions. Then I told my story, from the initial confrontation to the court victory to Karen's criminal conviction. During the question and answer session, a woman in the back raised her hand. What would you say to someone who is afraid to fight their HOA because they cannot afford it? 2 things, I said. First, check if your homeowner's insurance includes legal coverage. A lot of policies do, and it can cover HOA disputes. Second, do not assume you need a lawyer for everything. In my case, I needed one because they sued me. But before that, I was able to push back effectively with documentation, get expert opinions in writing, cite the specific bylaws. Demand that the HOA explain their legal basis for their actions. A lot of HOA boards back down when you show you know your rights and are willing to fight. They count on people being too intimidated or too tired to resist. Another man asked, what happens if the whole board is corrupt or incompetent? How do you fix that? Recall petition. In North Carolina, HOAs are required to have a process for removing board members. It is usually in your governing documents. Get your neighbors organized, collect signatures, and force an election. People are more willing to get involved than you might think, especially if they have their own grievances. We were shocked at how many people came forward once we started the recall process. After the seminar, several people came up to thank me and share their own HOA horror stories. It was clear that what happened in Meadowbrook Estates was not unique. HOAs across the country were dealing with similar issues, petty tyrants with a little bit of power making life miserable for their neighbors. That summer, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA held its annual community barbecue. It was the best-attended event in years. People actually wanted to participate in the community again because it felt like a community, not a dictatorship. Kids played on the newly repaired playground. Adults mingled and talked and laughed. The food was good and the weather was perfect. I stood under my oak tree in the backyard, looking over at the common area where the party was happening. The branches extended peacefully over the walking path, providing shade for people strolling by. No one was worried about the tree falling. No one was measuring how far the branches overhung the path. It was just a tree, doing what trees do, providing beauty and shade and a connection to the past. Sarah came up beside me and took my hand. Thinking about the battle, just appreciating the outcome. "You know, that tree probably thinks you are a pretty good friend," I laughed. "Trees do not think." "Maybe not. But if they did, that one would be grateful." Over the following months, life returned to a comfortable normal. The HOA board handled routine business without drama. Violations were rare and reasonable. People took pride in their homes without fear of arbitrary enforcement. The neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again. I did receive one more piece of correspondence related to the whole affair. It came in September, about 16 months after everything started. It was a handwritten note, forwarded through Patricia Dalton's office with no return address. "Mr. Irving, you were right about the tree. I let my authority go to my head, and I hurt people who were just trying to live their lives. I am sorry for what I put you through. I am getting help and trying to be a better person. Thank you for holding me accountable, even though I did not see it that way at the time. Karen." I read the note twice. It was surprising to receive an apology, especially one that seemed genuine. I did not know if Karen had truly changed or if the note was part of some court-ordered restitution process, but it did not really matter. The damage had been done and addressed. The systems were in place to prevent it from happening again. I filed the note away in the folder with all the other documents from the case. The HOA letters, the Arborist report, the court filings, the judgment. It was a complete record of standing up to unreasonable authority and winning. That fall, Robert Hayes came by to do a routine inspection of the oak tree as part of an ongoing maintenance plan we had set up. He climbed up into the canopy and checked the branches, tested the trunk, and examined the root system. "Still healthy as ever," he reported when he came down. "I pruned a couple of dead twigs, but that is normal. This tree is going to outlive all of us." "Good to hear. You know, I have been doing this job for over 30 years and I have seen a lot of beautiful trees cut down for stupid reasons. Politics, spite, ignorance, laziness. It is always a shame. So thank you for fighting to save this one. The world needs more people willing to stand up for things that matter, even when it is hard. It was just a tree. It was never just a tree. It was about whether people with a little bit of power can bully those without it. You proved they cannot. That matters." After Robert left, I sat on my back porch with a beer and looked up at the oak. The leaves were starting to turn, flashes of gold and brown among the green. Soon they would fall, and the tree would stand bare through the winter before coming back to life in the spring. It had been doing that cycle for 90 years, through wars and recessions, and countless human dramas playing out in its shadow. Karen Fitzgerald had wanted to cut it down to prove a point, to exercise her authority, to put me in my place. Instead, her actions had exposed her corruption. cost her position and reputation, and resulted in criminal charges. Meanwhile, the tree still stood, unharmed and unbothered by the human chaos that had swirled around it. There was probably a lesson in that, something about the permanence of nature versus the temporary nature of human power. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Sometimes you just have to stand your ground and fight for what is right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. The neighborhood had changed for the better. The HOA functioned properly now, serving the community instead of ruling over it. People were happier, more engaged, and more willing to participate in making Meadowbrook Estates a great place to live. And it all started because I refused to cut down a tree that did not need to be cut down. As I sat there in the fading evening light, I thought about all the people who had supported me through the process. Patricia Dalton with her sharp legal mind and determination to hold the HOA accountable, Robert Hayes with his expertise and integrity, Tom and Linda and the other neighbors who stood up and demanded change, Sarah who stuck with me even when she thought I was being stubborn, Marcus who pointed me in the right direction from the start. I also thought about the people who would benefit from what happened without even knowing it. Future homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates who would live under fair and reasonable rules. Residents in other communities who heard about the case and found the courage to challenge their own abusive HOAs. Anyone who would ever sit under the shade of that oak tree and enjoy its beauty. One person standing up had created ripples that spread far beyond what I ever imagined when I first told Karen Fitzgerald no. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear above the canopy of leaves, I finished my beer and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight, I was content knowing that I had fought the right fight and won, that justice had prevailed, and that a beautiful old oak tree would continue to stand for generations to come. The tree was still there, solid and strong, its roots deep in the Carolina soil, its branches reaching toward the sky. And that, in the end, was all that really mattered.